Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome. I'm Kate Markert. I'm Executive Director here at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens, and I'm thrilled that you're all here, and a special welcome to those of you in our simulcast. You know what I'm going to say now. Before we continue, please turn it off. Mine's out in the lobby, just, you know, because mine would be the one that would go off. So tonight marks the last lecture of 2018. Aww. But Hillwood is always bustling through the holidays, and we have had one fabulous series of lectures this year. I mean, really, haven't we? But there's still more to look forward to, of course. You know, we do all of our holiday decor. It's all up the Thanksgiving week. And this year it's called Festive Fabergé. So all of the trees are inspired by objects in the Fabergé exhibition. So you can imagine there's going to be a lot of sparkle there. So on Tuesday, December the 4th, I know lots of you are members here tonight, and I hope you will all join us for our annual members holiday, which goes from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on that day. And it's actually a fabulous occasion because you get 20% discount in the shop on that day. So worth becoming a member if you're not already a member. And if you're really holding out, on Giving Tuesday, which is November the 28th, we're offering a 20% discount on any new or gift membership purchased. So, of course, if you have those hard-to-buy-for people on your list, a Hillwood membership would just be, you know, a great gift. So it's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's program. Of course, tonight we celebrate the legacy of Hillwood's former executive director, Frederick J. Fisher. And during Fred's 20 years at the helm of Hillwood, his concern for professional and academic rigor really transformed this institution. So we honor that tonight with the 7th annual lecture in his honor. Dr. Sylvain Cordier has been curator of early decorative arts at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts since 2013. A specialist of 18th and early 19th century decorative arts, he was a lecturer at the Sorbonne, where he defended his doctoral thesis in 2009. He joined the Metropolitan Museum of Art as a Jane and Morgan Whitney Fellow and the Getty Research Institute as a postdoctoral fellow. In Montreal, Dr. Cordier co-curated the exhibition Fabulous Fabergé and Metamorphosis in Rodin's studio. His last exhibition, Napoleon, Art and Court Life in the Imperial Palace, opened last February at the MMFA and has traveled to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, and it just opened at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City. It will travel next year to the Musée National du Château de Fontainebleau in France. And there's a lovely catalog for the exhibition available in our museum shop. And of course, Sylvain will be happy to sign copies for you after the program. So please join me in welcoming Sylvain Cordier.
Thank you very much for a very, very kind welcome. I'm very, very happy and very excited to be here. As was said, it's a real pleasure for me to come and talk about the exhibition that is touring right now in Canada and now in the US before coming to France. And I really kind of wanted tonight to have an opportunity to organize a lecture. I've been lecturing about the subject quite a few times since the opening of the exhibition in Montreal, but I think tonight what I really wanted specifically was to use works of art and discuss works of art to explain the concept of the, quite clearly, the concept of the court, behaving at the court, and who does what at the court of Napoleon during Napoleon's reign from 1804 to 1815, a subject that we realize when working on curating this exhibition is a subject that people would think that they would understand it, but in fact kind of needed to be clearly reevaluated and studied a bit better. I think the key concept and the key question around such a subject like the imperial household and like the very purpose of the recreation of a monarchical court for France after the revolution, the key idea is that why the need of, for Napoleon, for someone who kind of grew up and made his career thanks to the origin and the outcoming of the revolution, when coming to power and when fashioning a power, eventually went into the idea that coming back to monarchical forms of power, to coming back to monarchical concepts was important and was probably more secure for him than protecting the republic the way he had inherited. I'm showing you, I mean, two extremely famous images of Napoleon that kind of sum up, Napoleon Bonaparte, I should say, that sum up the concept. How you go, if you know the story of Napoleon, brought up as a small aristocratic, small noble teenager, trained as a military during the last years of the Ancien Régime, who actually managed to become, who would never have succeeded in becoming a huge, important general as he was, had not there been a revolution, and who then got sufficient power over the 1790s thanks to the events of the revolution to finally, through the coup d'etat of Brumaire, managing to be created the first non-royal head of state that France would have, and that is, of course, the title and the function of first consul of the Republic, and then how this consulate, this sort of semi-monarchy that would sort of hide its name, its real nature for the first years, would actually kind of naturally evolve into the recreation of a monarchy, no more, not a royalty anymore, but an imperiality over the years 1802, 1804 until the proclaiming of the empire in 1804, and everything that went with it, like the reinvention of a monarchical aura, legitimacy, a statement that we can see in a portrait like, of course, the fantastic portrait of Napoleon in Grand Habillement that we see here by François Gérard. The idea, the concept of a monarchy doesn't go without, of course, pomp and circumstance, but most important, without the idea that the body of the monarch is sacred, so that the very the life and the very identity of the person, of the crowned head of state, is a bit different. Is of a clear different nature as the rest of the population and as the rest of the subjects. And over, like, since I would say since there were monarchies since the antiquities, the idea that of the prince, of the monarch being surrounded not only by a court but by a series of people, a staff of people that would not only be there to serve him or her, but be involved into fashioning the very monarchical identity, the sacredness of the body, and kind of making that clear as possible that the nature of the identity of the monarch is of a different kind than from the rest of society is at the core of the concept of the household. Here, I'm very happy to show an image, a very beautiful image that you can see representing, they're coming from a book representing in the 18th century, coming from a book made to celebrate the coronation of Louis XVI in 1774, that shows you, represents the moment when the king, on the day of his coronation, would wake up and be, greeted by members of his court and members of his court, and especially members of his family, but also, as you can see, be surrounded by people at his service. Those were courtiers, members of the royal household, as was called. So that means chamberlains in charge of welcoming guests who would pay homage to the king on his bed, or also equerries or different servants that would be, as many actors of the permanent spectacle of power. And when coming to power, not only coming to power, but kind of managing to transform his republican power into an imperial one, Napoleon and people around Napoleon were very concerned and very convinced that such a decor, not only such a decor, but such an involvement of people whose job, daily job, would be to come back to this kind of monarchical way of life and way of staging power was really crucial. Of course, I'm showing you Louis XVI, and very briefly evoking that 1774, Louis XVI gets crowned, and he's been 75 actually, and he's been king since 74. There was a major event that, of course, happened during the revolution that kind of challenged the idea of coming back to a monarchy, or this very concept that the body of the king is sacred, is that the last monarchy, the Ancien Régime monarchy, of course, which you see in all its grandeur with this portrait of Louis XVI by Calais, ended up with the king being decapitated. So this idea of the sacred body had kind of suffered a bit from a philosophical political point of view, and suffered a lot from the personal point of view of poor king. So also coming back to this kind of forms of monarchies and to the very idea of recreating that also was facing a clear, very important challenge. Another challenge that was crucial is, of course, and I might sound a little Star Wars here, but it's when you're when you're making your career out of the revolution and you're turned into a head of state to protect the republic, you're not supposed to crown yourself only a few years after, and to turn the republic into an empire. Very clear reasons why the government thought that it would be worthy to move from a republic to a monarchy. It's especially with the fact that Napoleon had escaped several projects of killing, of being killed, and that the government faced the fact that if one of them had succeeded, probably the regime that was supposed to rebuild France under the Consulate time would be completely jeopardized, and that coming back to monarchical forms, so that means to also a form of government where there's no question as to who is going to succeed the ruler after the ruler's death, was probably a better, a more satisfactory solution from very purely practical terms in case Bonaparte was killed. Well, this is the practical explanation. However, it seems like obvious that Napoleon had in mind this idea that probably it was very exciting to move from one substance as a private individual, turn into a hero of the revolution, into something new, which would be the sacred body of a monarch. At the top of the organization of this huge staff that was as I was saying, both in charge of managing the daily life of the sovereign and of the new sovereign and his family, but also of staging and thinking about this concept of power, of new sacred power, was what we call the imperial household, la maison de l'empereur in French. And it was the same way as the maison du roi, the royal household, would exist in the pre-revolutionary period. This household, Napoleon was very, very strict. Napoleon is a military officer, so everything has to be really clearly divided into and very clearly designed and defined. And so the idea was to kind of divide up into 6 sections the different directions in which the public and private life of the emperor and the family would be arranged and organized on a daily basis, and appointing at the head of those the 6 departments created, therefore, appointing 6 grand officers. The first grand officer, so the first department from a hierarchical point of view, was, of course, church at court, so what we call the grand chaplaincy, the office of the grand chaplain. You see here a portrait of the grand chaplain that Napoleon appointed, Cardinal Fesch. Cardinal Joseph Fesch was the bishop of Lyon of the time, so in France the most senior position among the bishops of the French Catholic Church. He was also, interestingly enough, Napoleon's uncle. It's the only occasion, actually, half uncle. He was the half brother of his mother, Madame Mère. So Corsican gentleman. It's a Corsican family. I don't know if you know Corsica, but they tend to be tough people. And clearly, Joseph Fesch is a very interesting character in the sense that he was kind of the uncle. You know, Napoleon's father died when he was very young, and Joseph Fesch was not much older than Napoleon, but clearly had this kind of, when the family was very poor, was struggling with everything in the 1780s, he managed to take care of them while starting his career as a clergyman. And so it was just only natural for Napoleon to appoint him at this very, very prestigious position at court. You see him represented on a painting by Rouget, a detail actually of the wedding of Napoleon and Marie-Louise in 1810, and he's celebrating. Of course, the function of the chaplaincy, the function of the grand chaplain, is to celebrate the Catholic rite at the imperial court. Napoleon was not really a faithful Christian. I mean, or at least not I don't know, I was not there to judge, but not really not very super interested into religious matters, unless it would contradict, and it eventually did, it would contradict his political views. And especially, you know, that the big crisis that he had with Pope Pius VII clearly was an image of that. However, he was very convinced that his court should be a Catholic one due to the Catholic tradition of France at the time. And there is so the forms, the shapes, and the function of court of rite ritual at the court was, you know, one of the aspects of the day-to-day pomp and circumstance, if I should say so. There's a funny story because in 1810 Napoleon marries with Marie-Louise after divorcing Josephine. So in terms of relations to the church, it created quite a turmoil. And he he married a Habsburg princess, Archduchess Marie-Louise, who was raised as a very, very profound and faithful Catholic, and who would hear Mass every day and would attend Mass every day. And there's this funny story of one of, not him directly, but one of his one of the first chaplains of the household, so one of the clergymen who were helping the grand chaplain, kind of saying to her one day, you know, Madame, it's wonderful that you come to Mass every morning in the Imperial Chapel. It's truly wonderful. But it also shows that the emperor never comes. And so maybe what we could do is organize Mass in your private apartments, and there I can say Mass to you every day, but maybe it's not that great to attend that in the official chapel of the palace. Then comes probably the most senior character of the household, the person who had the most important influence on the household. Incidentally, the household during the empire, like the best years of the empire, would employ 3,500 people. That's the staff we're talking about, you know, to fashioning the imperial ethos of Napoleon turned into a sovereign. And the person probably the most senior member would be this man, the Grand Marshal of the Palace. And the Grand Marshal of the Palace, like who ran the office during most of the empire, is this man in a fantastic portrait by Antoine Jean Gros. Is named Duroc, Duke of Frioul, who's an interesting character. Is the general, of course. I mean, most of them were, not most of them, but a lot of them were military officers. And Duroc is an interesting figure for the history of the Napoleonic era, because he was probably one of the person who would understand Napoleon the best. Napoleon was a kind of a difficult character to live with on a daily basis, but probably Duroc counts among the rare friends, people that we could call Napoleon's friends at the time. A fascinating portrait that we could have in the show. And I'm pointing this rarely official civil uniforms that members of the household would be entitled to wear at court. Rarely are they conserved. Actually, two costumes of grand officers survive nowadays. This is one of them. This is the costume worn by the Grand Marshal of the Palace, not Duroc, because unfortunately Duroc died unfortunately for him, he died in 1813 on the battlefield and was replaced in 1813 by another Grand Marshal of the Palace, General Bertrand, and General Bertrand had this costume made. You will notice that because I'll show you other portraits of members of the household. This very interesting design of a palm tree that you see, of course, that you see on. It's complicated. What's happening? That you see on the mantle, and that you also see on the jacket. The palm tree seems to be, unfortunately, I failed at finding the right documents that would clearly say that, but the palm tree appears everywhere on the elements or the representations of costumes involving people of the household. So it's very likely the symbol that was chosen of the household. And why so? Kind of obviously related to the aesthetics of the coming back from the Egyptian campaign, which Bonaparte and a lot of people at his court were involved with in the late 1790s, but also because the palm tree is the tree that symbolically offers you food and rest during your time in the desert. So a very good symbol of a household and the responsibilities of a household. Other grand officer of great importance, especially for my talk tonight, the Grand Master of Ceremonies. So the person in charge of ruling the department of, I would say, historians or researchers or documentalists, we would say today, people involved with doing the research as to fashioning the court in a fair, accurate way, something that would not be judged tacky, something that would be judged tasteful, something that would be judged as pertinent in the whole long story of monarchies from the Middle Ages to the current monarchies that were existing at the time of Napoleon in the rest of Europe. And that required a staff of very gifted researchers and historians led by this man, the Comte de Ségur. And the Comte de Ségur is an very interesting figure who so far had been kind of looked at by most historians as not a very fascinating character, who basically got his job because he was the Count de Ségur, so he was coming from a very prestigious aristocratic families from the pre-revolutionary period. His father was the Marshal of Ségur, so a big military officer, marshal from the Ancien Régime, and he grew up at Versailles during the late reign of Louis XV and reign of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. And basically that was it. Like in most research that had been made about Ségur was that, of course, Napoleon appointed like one of the people who had known by heart, because he grew up in this context, like the rules of Versailles, and was perfectly capable of remembering those. Actually, when researching a bit more about this character, I found out he's a much more interesting character than what was thought before. He was, first of all, he was an important member of an important aristocratic family, and that, you know, the heritage and the perfect knowledge of the monarchical tradition, of the royal tradition of the Ancien Régime was obvious as far as he was concerned. But it's also he's also a liberal figure. He's also one of the aristocrats who got interested and favored the first years of the revolution, perfectly aware of the need for change of the Ancien Régime. And in the 1770s, as a young man, he actually made the trip, if I would call that, made the trip to America with Rochambeau and Lafayette to support the independence of the American people. And that makes the character quite more interesting than what was thought before. He was a very gifted, I think, very profound historian as well. I mean, he wrote a history of France in several volumes. He wrote also a very interesting history of the Jews later, after the Empire period, when he retired. And so quite an interesting character, which I think the appointment was less due to his experience of the court of Versailles, but more to his cleverness, actually, and his ability to make the distinction between what was pertinent into promoting as coming from the Ancien Régime when creating the court, but also having a very good sense of what liberalism was about and what all the gifts that the revolution had happened to society, what had to be conserved, what had to be respected in terms of shaping a new court. Very interesting character. Other very interesting character, we're moving from another department of the household, the portrait of the Grand Chamberlain. So the Grand Chamberlain is in charge of the Imperial chamber, so the bedchamber of the empress, symbolically. It's a huge, very prestigious function of the household, not involving the same acts of commanding as the Grand Marshal of the Palace that I was showing you earlier, but in terms of prestige of the function, the Grand Chamberlain is one of the most important characters of the court. The first Grand Chamberlain appointed in 1804, at the beginning of the regime, was the Prince de Talleyrand, who was also, and here you have a portrait of him, fantastic portrait by Prudhon, coming from Musée Carnavalet in Paris, and the portrait of the Prince de Talleyrand was at the same time the Ministry of Foreign Office to Napoleon, so kind of accumulating those two functions. However, the hierarchy of honors at court makes so that being the Grand Chamberlain is more prestigious than being Minister of Foreign Office. That also tells you about the sense of hierarchy in that context. And very clearly betrayed Napoleon from the year 1808 and especially 1809, up to the point that Napoleon finally fired him from both his position as Grand Chamberlain of the Household and Minister of Foreign Office. There's the very famous, probably spurious, not very true episodes of Napoleon firing Talleyrand and telling him, sorry, you're shit in a silk stocking. When you see the portrait, I mean, so, and to which Talleyrand is supposed to have replied, it's such a pity that such a great man is so ill-mannered. Anyways, we don't really know. We probably think that this never really happened. But I think that gives you a kind of an idea of the ambience at court. So Talleyrand is this very fascinating figure, and then he gets replaced by another character, less interesting probably, but much more faithful to the cause of the regime, who's Comte de Montesquieu, who is then Grand Chamberlain from 1810 to 1814, the end of the regime. Then comes the Grand Master of the Hunt, Marshal Berthier, who you see here, and you notice, and again, so this is the second costume of Grand Officer of the Household that survived. Again, you see the palm tree, the design of the palm tree, and this is conserved at the Musée de l'Armée in Paris. This is the costume that you see on this fabulous portrait. As you notice, so the uniform is sort of always the same, and you saw those portraits. They always wear the same uniforms, who are designed the same way. Only the color would vary. Each one of the departments, again, very militaristically organized, very clear. Napoleon had to understand, everyone had to understand who was doing what. So the idea was that colors would define the departments to which you would belong as grand officers, or as officers like junior staff would also follow the colors of their senior staff. So gorgeous costume that we can see here. Grand Master of the Hunt. Napoleon is a very bad hunter. He even blinded one of his marshal. Like Marshal Masséna lost an eye in the story, and then Napoleon is repeatedly blamed the Grand Master of the Hunt for doing that, so Napoleon is a bad hunter for sure, but very, very convinced that re-promoting the tradition of royal hunting is part of the permanent spectacle of monarchical life. So, of course, a department, not the most important, but a department of the household is dedicated to organizing hunts in any kind of circumstances where the emperor could leave and do whatever. And then comes the last one of the grand officers of the household. Beautiful portrait, unfortunately, that I could not borrow for the exhibition. Portrait of the grand equerry of the household, the Duc de Vicence, named Caulaincourt, and I could not borrow that amazing. Never published. I mean, the catalog was the first occasion that that painting got to be actually published, because it's still conserved in the descendants of the Duc de Vicence in question. It's in their gorgeous castle in the north of France, and unfortunately, it's framed into marble, so you cannot remove it from the wall. So, but an amazing portrait by Bonnemaison dating from 1806. Again, you see it's the same. Jacket, the same design, the same mantle. Again, the design of the palm tree, and in that case, the color blue. Normally, a kind of a lighter color than the one we see here, the more clear blue, light blue. Sorry. And also interesting, we saw it on several occasions. The fact that at court, the grand officers of the household were requested to wear the staff. Ceremonial staff. Parallel to the emperor's household, there was the empress's household, kind of an entity that kind of was organized and fashioned and managed by the emperor's household, but which would count some male staff, but mostly women staff, and would be chaired by a lady called the Lady of Honor, la Dame d'Honneur de l'Impératrice. During the first part of the empire, when Joséphine is Empress of the French, it's this lady who is in charge of the Empress's household as a Lady of Honor. She's the Countess de la Rochefoucauld, again coming from one of the most important aristocratic families from the Ancien Régime. She happened to be a remote cousin of Empress Joséphine, and she's appointed there very likely because of that reason. The role of the Lady of Honor is not an extremely powerful one, because Napoleon decides of everything anyways. So it's more a protocolar form of involvement. She hated Napoleon, La Rochefoucauld, but everyone hates each other at the Imperial court anyways, but she hated Napoleon, Napoleon hated her, would call her as ugly as she's stupid, so ambience, and she eventually resigned from her position when Joséphine and Napoleon divorced, and when Napoleon got married with Marie-Louise, he appointed, of course, a completely new imperial empress's household and members of this empress's household, and decided to appoint as the new Lady of Honor this lady, the Duchess of Montebello, who hated him as well, for some reasons. The Duchess of Montebello, and I really want to point this absolutely amazing portrait that we see here, which is made by Baron François Gérard. It's a portrait of the Duchess of Montebello and her children, which is on loan to the exhibition from the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, and which is, I think, one of the most amazing portraits of the period conserved in North America. Why did she hate Napoleon so much? She was the widow, so we're in 1810. The Duchess of Montebello is the wife of the Duke of Montebello, Marshal Lannes, one of Napoleon's early companions, who had been promoted with him and then was turned into a marshal of the empire in 1804 at the proclamation of the empire, and the Duke of Montebello, and then created Duke of Montebello in 1808. And in 1809, the Duke of Montebello was, of course, with the other marshals, involved into the Austrian campaign, so France versus Austria, and was killed on the battlefield at the Battle of Essling in 1809. The couple was madly in love, had those 5 children. The Duchess is absolutely devastated by the announcement of her husband's death, and she decides to withdraw from the court and to go into to withdraw into her country estate at Maison near Paris. Lannes dies, but the Austrian campaign is a success, and is so much a success that Napoleon can kind of blackmail the Austrian emperor to the point of forcing him to give him his daughter for him to marry. And that's the marriage. The marriage with Marie-Louise is a direct consequence of the Austrians losing the campaign of 1809. And so an Austrian is going to be an Austrian princess who's going to come to France and become the new empress. And Napoleon decides that, well, who to appoint as Lady of Honor of this new Austrian origin a princess? Well, there's the Duchess of Montebello, of course. Why not? She's miserable because she's desperate because her husband was killed in a battle that was against the Austrians, was basically killed by the Austrian. An Austrian princess comes, let's appoint her as a Lady of Honor. So kind of, not the best, not very interested in psychology at the time, anyways. And so she really, resented Napoleon guts for the death of her father. Interestingly enough, she became, of course, she had to obey. So she went back to court, of course, she managed to become actually good friends with Marie-Louise, and probably speaking ill of Napoleon when they were together, as much as they could. The portrait is really amazing. I think really we want to look at it more closely because. So you see, she's represented in like wandering with her children in probably in the park of her Château de Maison, and they're passing by the statue, and it's very clear, even though you don't see who the statue is represented, it was very clear to people at the time that this was a statue of the father, of the deceased father, because it was known and extremely publicized that Marshal Ney had been killed very bravely at battle. Napoleon was truly saddened by the death of Lannes because he had great respect for him, but that he was killed by a cannonball. And of course, for Gérard, and I think that's quite brilliant, like the fact of just, as if it was a saint, you know, those saints that would be represented just by the instrument of their passion, just to evoke Marshal Lannes' death, you have a boot and the cannonball. And so the family is passing by the representation of the dead father, and you see the head of the new duke, the head of the family, who's just like a very, very early teenager, who's the only one. I mean, everyone is basically kind of sad. And what seems to be at first glance like a very cute, nice portrait of a loving family is actually quite a desperate image of what it means to be a new aristocratic family of that empire. And what do you owe your title? You owe your title to the death of the father and the death of the hero of the family. And you see that he's the only one who's like mature enough to understand that his crown as duke is just, he owes it to the absence of the father. It's a very, very moving image and extremely cleverly done. What I particularly like is that you have the cannonball at the foot of the father, and you have also, I don't know if you see that, but you have the little ball at the foot of one of the sons, as if you had this idea that, you know, they are the toys of the children and the toys of the adults, and some are more dangerous than the others. And I mean, it's really something. I'm very, very thankful to the Houston Museum of Fine Arts for lending this portrait to the exhibition. Another interesting painting, also in terms of being thankful for being grateful for the loan, is that painting by Dufaux, which I found actually in a private collection in France, coming from the descendants of the people represented here. Here I want to show this portrait because in the exhibition, of course, I wanted to display and exhibit examples of representations of junior members of the different households, both the empress and the empress. And to tell the story, actually, I was looking kind of desperately for a representation of a page of the household. Pages were those teenagers recruited coming from the best French families of the time, and recruited between the age of 14th and the age and kind of serving until the age of 18th, and who would wear this costume that you see here. And I was desperately looking for a portrait, saying, of course, I mean, we could find representations of pages in many representations in many paintings, but like really from up close, like really showing the uniform, and it was not that easy. And it's a colleague of mine who at some point just pointed out that he had seen in a collection in a castle, like in the center of France, in the house of descendants from an important imperial family from the empire, a portrait showing a page. And so I got in contact with the family, who originally were not very keen, I mean, who would not originally agree to lend this painting. It's a pretty big painting. It's like more than 2 meters high, more than almost 3 meters high, and so I corresponded with them, and the lady very kindly replied to me saying, you know, I mean, we're very reluctant because that painting has not left the house since 1842. What do you want to reply to that? You know, so I said, well, of course, I can understand, but this is so interesting that at least I would like to publish it in the catalog if you agree. And she said, oh, of course, yes, wonderful. We would be very happy if you could publish it in the catalog. Next time you come to France, come and visit, and blah, blah, blah. And so I go and facing that portrait, that big portrait of the family, and we discuss about the people represented. So this is General de Marescot, who's an important officer. His wife was a lady in waiting to the empress, so belonging to the empress's household under the responsibility of the lady of honor, who I was presenting earlier. And their son was page of the emperor. The painting dates from 1806 to 2 years after the proclaiming of the empire. It's one of those new aristocratic families who kind of affirm its status by commissioning this portrait. Their baby girl has Napoleon and Josephine as for godfather and godmother, and the lady represented here is the mother to the mother of the family, to Cécile de Marescot. And so I'm facing that portrait, and the husband of the family tells, oh, you know, it's fun. We did some research on waiting for you, and you will never guess where this lady, so the mother to Cécile de Marescot, where she was born in the 1740s. I don't know, where could she be born? Well, in Montreal. And I was like, what? Yes, she belonged to a family of French people who had immigrated. I mean, I'm not going to talk about the history of Canada, but basically a French family who had immigrated in the later part of the 17th century when French Canada was in the making. And the family had stayed there until the fall of Quebec, French Canada, to the British, and Montreal fell and was conquered by the English in 1760. And so that family, the Martel family, escaped then and came back to France, where she, in fact, married into French aristocracy and so on. And so I was like, okay, so you're telling me that this is the only proof that there was people of Canadian origin at the court of Napoleon, because she's the mother and the grandmother of a page, mother of a lady in waiting, and grandmother of a page. And she says yes. So I said, you have to change your mind. Of course, this painting has to come to Montreal, has to be a tour of a part of the show, and I was deciding not to leave, the place until they would change their mind, and they were extremely nice people, and so they eventually agreed on lending the portrait, and that's how the painting is in the exhibition today. So talking very briefly, of course, I told about the people, but we have to talk, of course, about the places of where the court happens, and the most important place where the court is organized is the Parisian residence of Napoleon. At the time, it's a palace called the Palais des Tuileries, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. If you know Paris, you probably recognize this building and that building, which is Pavillon de Marsan and Pavillon de Flore, which today belong to the Louvre Museum. They're like the ends of the Louvre Museum. And an image like this tells you that originally, until 1970, in fact, until 1980, but until 1870, they were kind of, there was like this big block of buildings called the Palais des Tuileries existing between those two parts of the Louvre, and that palace was destroyed at the end of the Second Empire in 1870, and was finally completely demolished in the 1880s. But that's another story. This is the most important part. This is the most important residence of Napoleon, of course. Napoleon also enjoyed other palaces, such as Saint-Cloud, such as Fontainebleau. Those being the three most important. Malmaison, of course. Also, if you know the castle today, but it's moving. But definitely, the Tuileries is where things were designed and defined by the services of the household. Now I would like to take some time to discuss behaving at the court and kind of how art and how representation can be a great source of interpretation of the etiquette and protocol in the context of the imperial household. What you have here is a fascinating painting by Goubot representing the oath taken by the Roman Senate to the emperor in the throne room of the Tuileries Palace in 1809. It's a very interesting. It's a fascinating representation because, as I was saying earlier, the palace of the Tuileries has disappeared. So every instances of representation of what the inside would look like is great testimony and great documentation. And the painting is actually huge. Like it's really, I think like 5 meters by 3, so could not be lent to the exhibition. But it's a fascinating document to look at. The point of the painting, it's a painting that was presented at the Salon of 1810, and the point of the painting is, of course, involved in the promotion of one of the most controversial actions of Napoleon, politically and diplomatically speaking, which was the invasion of the Papal States of Rome from 1808, 1809 until 1814. The fact of the French Empire seizing the capital of the popes and turning Rome into the second capital of the empire was very controversial. Obviously, I mean you don't attack the Pope with sorry.
Unless you're Charles V, that one guy who invaded it during Henry VIII's time.
Yeah, but that created a lot of controversy already at the time in the 16th century, so one of the elements that the government of Napoleon and the imperial household were convinced of, it was that an important celebration and ceremony had to be organized officially so that the Roman aristocracy would come and take an oath to the emperor and show their respect and show their agreement, basically, to the integration of Rome into the empire. And so that was a major ceremony that would take place in the Tuileries Palace in 1809. And so looking at that, I looked at the painting and I wanted to have kind of a look at that painting with the etiquette of the Palais Imperial. So that text that the Grand Master of Ceremonies published in 1806, which would kind of integrate all the different rules that the household would design to create the spirit of the imperial court. And there's a whole chapter dedicated to, of course, receptions, presentations of people to the emperor, and describing the different categories into that where the different layers of hierarchical layers of presentations. And basically what you see here corresponds to what in the etiquette is called as présentation simple, so simple presentations. I'll let you, the judge of the concept of the simplicity of the ambience. It's of course, a simple presentation was kind of spectacular, as you can say, but it's related. The simplicity of the expression is related to the status of the person presented, and of course, because these people were only senators, they would only be welcomed and presented in the context of a simple presentation. Had they been heads of state, had they been crowned heads of state, it would be more spectacular. Grande présentation, so big presentations. What is interesting is to kind of divide, interpret what's going on. So we see these. It's not very practical. We see here those the senators, the Roman senators here. I'm gonna go here. No, sorry. Represented by the first one of them, who are taking the oath. Napoleon is seated on the throne. We recognize here the Comte de Ségur, who I presented to you earlier, and who is in charge, of course, of the first part of the introduction. So he's in front of the throne, and he's kind of indicating that the people presented can actually be sort of introduced to the emperor, and he would normally he would claim their name to the emperor. But in this context, we see that he probably didn't, because you have a character here. Whoop, what's happening? A character here in this very formal white costume, and the white costume was the costume worn at the court by Napoleon's brothers. It's only them, what we call the imperial princes, could wear this white costume and had to wear this white costume. And so he's present, and you see that, for instance, he's on the top of the stairs. So like between the emperor and the grand master of ceremonies. So he's the most senior character present here. It's probably so it's obviously one of Napoleon's brothers, and probably Jérôme Bonaparte, king of Westphalia at the time. And the presence, the representation of him in this position kind of actually clearly qualifies as one of the little descriptions in the etiquette, is that for some cases of presentation, of simple presentation, but when the person who's presented, or the body of persons who are presented, is considered important enough, it might be, I mean, the Grand Master of Ceremonies might want to withdraw and leave the responsibility of introducing to either a grand dignitary, so someone above him, or even one of the brothers of the emperor. So that tells you that really those Roman senators, Napoleon really wanted to treat them well and to show his respect and his consideration. The household is represented also by the grand chaplain, who you see here in his habit, in his costume of cardinal. Oop. And we see the grand marshal of the palace, represented here in the red, and the grand chamberlain is the red character here that you only see the bust, whoop, over there. And so that's, yeah, I think these are kind of interesting occasions where it's not only historic peinture d'histoire, history painting, but also like a clear representations of the different responsibilities of the household in terms of fashioning the spirit of the court. A great also work of art that is conserved at the Louvre Museum is this drawing by Benjamin Zix, representing the cortège of the court after Napoleon's wedding to Marie-Louise. The wedding happened in one of the salons of the Louvre Museum, and then the cortège is passing from the Louvre to the Tuileries Palace and going through, I mean, if you know the Louvre, you probably recognize this gallery, this very famous Grande Galerie of the Louvre, where today the Italian paintings are conserved, and which was originally like the largest part of the Louvre Museum at the time. It's a watercolor that art historians most of the time look at for the very absolute interest of documenting where the collections, how the collection was hung and placed, displayed in the Grand Gallery at the time. Most of those paintings actually belonging to, being works of art stolen by the French army to Italy, to the Papal State, and also incidentally, but also to Germany, to Holland, and etc. You recognize, for instance, Raphael's Transfiguration over there, which is back, of course, found its way back to Vatican City afterward. What I'm interested in by looking at this work of art is, of course, what it says in terms of the administration of the court and the representation of the court, because it really shows you different junior and senior members of the court. You see that Napoleon and Marie-Louise are here, and you would have members of the household all over here, and then guests and members of the imperial family in the back. For instance, we recognize that the cortege is kind of opened by pages. You see that the costume that I showed you, the teenager on the portrait, then would come in the blue equerries of the household, then in the red, chamberlains, and of course the closer to the emperor, the most senior, the most prestigious the function is. Then you would have, of course, the imperial couple. Then, and interestingly, you see that the empress has a mantle that is carried by very likely a princess from the imperial family, whose mantle itself is carried by a chamberlain, because he's in the red, and next to her there's probably another lady whose mantle is carried by an equerry, because the costume is in the blue. And you see that again, I mean, a chamberlain carrying and an equerry carrying a mantle for different princesses. And then, back before Napoleon and Marie-Louise, you would find just before them in the white princes, so the brothers of Napoleon, as in their white costume, which you see here. Then you would have the members of the household, the grand officers of the household that I presented you the portraits earlier. And for instance, the Grand Master of Ceremonies, Ségur, likely the Grand Master of the Grand Master of the Hunt, Grand Chamberlain, Grand Marshal of the Palace. Equerries would be there in the blue, Master of the Hunts in the green, and then you would have grand dignitaries. So an interesting way also to acknowledge and recognize who does what, which kind of seniority exists between them. That's quite an interesting drawing. A drawing that very likely was designed to be turned into a decor on porcelain for a big vase that was commissioned to the Sèvres manufacturer, but which never happened, which could never be made. Other fascinating representation of the household or the court in action after the wedding ceremonies in April 1810. Of course, there's the banquet, the official state banquet organized by the imperial household, and we have this amazing painting by Dufay di Casanova, conserved at the Château de Fontainebleau, which really shows the banquet table set in the theater of the Tuileries Palace, and with all the court gathered around the imperial family, and especially among the courtiers, member of the imperial household. Of course, I start by showing the table itself with the different members of the imperial family, and members. This is a very peculiar painting. That's at the same time kind of documented in a very precise way what's going on that very boring night of the banquet, and at the same time kind of portraying people not necessarily in the best situations, like. Of course, the empress is over here. She looks terrified. She was probably terrified because, I mean, like 6 months before, she considered that Napoleon was the Antichrist, basically. So it's kind of, she had to kind of get to the idea that she would marry him. He's kind of inviting her to eat something, like just, okay, it's in front of you, just eat it. What you would have, so Napoleon's brother, again in the white, would be seated here, and corresponding to their placement, their wives would be settled here. So Joseph, King of Spain, Louis, King of Holland, Jérôme, King of Westphalia, Murat, King of Naples, Camille Borghese, and the Grand Duke of Baden, and his wife, so Elisa, Hortense of Beauharnais. And it's fun because they seem to look at each other and talk to each other, but really just not being really interested by what they would have to say to each other. There is Catherine of Württemberg, so the wife of Jérôme here, which is kind of stuffing her mouth with something in a not very aristocratic way, refined way. Interestingly, Madame Mère, so Napoleon's mother, is kind of looking at her in a way of saying, "Oh my God, what is she doing?" Like the the coolest person you could imagine, I guess. Louis Bonaparte, it's interesting, had the reputation. So Louis Bonaparte is one of Napoleon's brother. He was married to Hortense de Beauharnais, and he had the reputation of being a severe alcoholic. And it's kind of interesting that he's the only one represented with someone pouring wine into his glass. The same, Catherine of Württemberg was notoriously overweight, and she's the one represented actually eating something, which is not really a good way to represent a princess. And so there are kind of interesting details that we can see. I mean, I could go on for a long time, but in terms of the involvement of the household, of course, it's the household that kind of organizes everything in this kind of circumstances. And you can recognize some people, like the Grand Marshal of the Palace, for instance, is here, represented here. You can see pages over there in the uniform that we saw on the Dufaux painting. And of course, Ségur, the Grand Master of Ceremony, is checking if everything is in order on the other side of the table. What is interesting is that the Grand Marshal of the Palace, so him, I'm pretty sure, is actually represented twice. Here, that's pretty obvious, and the etiquette, again, clearly states that the Grand Marshal of the Palace place is at the proper right of the table. And in fact, because he has a kind of a red costume, it's pretty clear that it's him. But it also states that the Grand Marshal of the Palace is the only person in charge of pouring wine and serving wine to the emperor at the beginning of the banquet. And you see a person with a mantle here, unfortunately hidden by the candelabras. You see that he has a flask, and you see that he has a servant next to him with a glass, and he's in the direction of the emperor. So that's interesting. It's probably some kind of an example of dual representation of the same character on a painting. Other instance of the representation, this time more like private, we saw public examples of for representations of the emperor. I want to say, how much time do I have? Okay, I'm kind of, yeah, okay. So what can I say? So I'm very talkative, I'm sorry. It's, I really like this subject. Well, I can go through some images and end up like briefly on the subject. You have representations. This is an amazing loan from a private collection in New York representing the birth of the emperor. And this is a fascinating representation of the bedroom and private quarters of Empress Marie-Louise in 1811 at the birth of the King of Rome, the heir to the throne. And I think I have to finish here. So thank you very much. Do we or don't we have time for questions? I don't.
We do 2 questions, Sylvain.
Sure.
And then we'll remind everyone now, while it's quiet, that there are books for sale. It's
Yes, yes.
catalog if you haven't seen it, and that Sylvain will be outside signing.
Sure.
Take home this lecture for you. So let's do 2 questions.
Sure.
How many paintings are there involving Napoleon? I mean, all over the world, apparently.
You want a precise number? Paintings, it would be difficult to answer. There was a funny reflections made by Jean Tullard, a French important historian, on the Napoleonic subject, which was not talking about paintings but about books. And he was saying that there has been since Napoleon about as many books published as there has been days since Napoleon's death in 1821. It's a huge subject in terms of bibliography, and in terms of paintings, it's paintings of the time. It's actually a very interesting question, because one of the crucial involvement of the household into fashioning a court and the spirit of the court was also by controlling very clearly, we would say the propaganda nowadays, but the very image of the emperor. And a very good way to promote the image of the emperor and to organize and to control would be to organize this exhibition that's called the Salon in Paris, which was happening every 2 years, and where artists of the time were invited to present their production for the Parisian public. And these occurrences, I mean, this salon happening every 2 years, would show as many images as Napoleon as possible. It's clear that the idea is to promote the image of the emperor and as many representations as possible. So a lot. I mean, definitely the regime being a clear propagandistic cause was a lot about the representation, the perfect representation of the emperor. Sure.
So I find it so fascinating, and I think you do such a great job of and kind of animating how identity is performed and how power is performed. And so I was thinking, well, who is that performance for, right? So in the court, it's clearly for, in a time of that's chaotic, you're following a revolution.
Absolutely.
That's important to do that for the aristocracy and other people within spheres of power. And so I was curious to how that performative nature of power translated to the people, and was it through representation?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as I was saying, I mean, everything is supposed to be turned into paintings that people could see at the Salon. This was exhibited at the Salon of 1812. This was exhibited at the Salon of 1810. These images were clearly involved in the propaganda. They had to exist because Napoleon invited, and the household invited a lot of people to attend the court, because this was a spectacle that the elite were supposed to see, because it's a time where it's the elite clearly that creates the support to the regime. So it's very important for Napoleon to both not completely lose the support of the former Republican people, I mean people in favor of the Republic, and but also kind of to attach his regime to the former aristocracy and the people disappointed by the revolution and still favoring the Ancien Régime cause. So the idea was that the imperial household and the imperial court was there to kind of create a melting pot of those two very different and contradictory origins.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Thanks very much. It's a good subject.
I just have one more question.
Sure.
Okay.